The night it all began, the rain didn't simply fall, it attacked, slashing against the diner windows in relentless sheets, the kind of rain that seemed to want to wash the city away, to drown its sins in silver torrents. And I remember thinking that if God ever wanted to start over, tonight would have been a good night to do it. The flickering neon sign outside hummed like a dying heartbeat, bathing the cracked counter in a sickly pink glow that made everything look a little unreal, a little ghostly, as if I were living inside someone else's memory instead of my own life. I was wiping down the counter for the third time, pretending not to notice that my reflection in the window looked tired and 20 years older than my age. Eddie's all-night grill was the kind of place time forgot, a sanctuary for drunks, truckers, and broken people who needed a place to exist until the sun rose and made them feel guilty again. I had been working there for almost 2 years, ever since my mother's medical bills had started to swallow what little future I thought I had, and each night felt like a quiet surrender, one greasy plate at a time. It was past midnight when the door opened, the small bell above it giving a weak jingle, and I turned automatically, expecting another regular with nicotine-stained hands and stories no one wanted to hear. But the man who stepped inside wasn't like the usual crowd. He looked lost in a way that went deeper than being soaked through by the rain. His clothes clung to him, heavy and dark, and his eyes, those hollow, tired eyes, carried a kind of desperation that made me pause mid-wipe. He hesitated near the door before sliding onto one of the stools at the counter, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to warm them against the lukewarm air. There was something dignified about him despite the rough edges, as if he hadn't always been this way, as if once upon a time he'd had something worth losing. "You want coffee?" I asked, already reaching for the pot. He glanced up, startled, like I'd caught him doing something he shouldn't. I don't have money," he said, voice low and rough, like gravel dragged across the heart. I didn't think. I just poured the coffee, the steam curling up between us like a fragile bridge. "Don't worry about it," I said, pushing the cup toward him. "Consider it on the house." He stared at it for a long moment, then at me, suspicion and disbelief fighting in his expression. "Why would you do that?" Because I knew what hunger did to people. Because I'd been there, sitting in the dark, wondering if kindness still existed in a world that had chewed me up. But I didn't say that. I just smiled. The kind of small, tired smile that wasn't meant to change the world, only soften it for a moment. "Because it's raining," I said simply. He nodded slowly and lifted the cup, his fingers brushing mine, and that tiny human contact felt heavier than it should have, like something unspoken had passed between us. That's when Carl came out from the back. Carl was my manager, though tyrant was a better word. Thick neck, slicked back hair, and a temper that burned hotter than the fryer. He had a talent for making people feel small, and he seemed to take pleasure in it, like cruelty was his one true hobby. "What the hell's this?" he barked, eyes darting to the stranger, then to the cup of coffee. "You serving freeloaders now?" I straightened my shoulders, the rag in my hand dripping water onto the counter. "He's cold. It's just coffee." Carl's mouth twisted into a sneer. "Coffee costs money. You planning to pay for him, sweetheart?" The stranger shifted uncomfortably, his eyes downcast. "I didn't ask her." "Quiet," Carl snapped, jabbing a finger at me. You think you can give away my stock because you feel sorry for some bum? You know what, Isabella? You're done. Clean out your locker. You're fired." The word slammed into me harder than I expected. Fired, just like that. After 2 years of greasy nights and aching feet and pretending to smile through every insult. My stomach dropped, and for a second I thought about begging, about telling him I needed this job, that I couldn't afford to lose it. But then I looked at the stranger's trembling hands, the way his eyes flicked toward the door like he was already apologizing for existing, and something inside me hardened. "Fine," I said, tearing off my apron and throwing it onto the counter. Keep your lousy job, Carl. The stranger stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and he looked at me with something like guilt, like he wished he could take it all back. But before either of us could speak, he turned and walked out into the storm, the bell above the door chiming weakly behind him. The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too fake. I pushed past Carl's sputtering threats and stepped outside. The rain hit me instantly, cold and unforgiving, soaking through my uniform in seconds. I could barely see past the neon haze of the sign reflecting on the puddles, but I caught a glimpse of the stranger's silhouette disappearing around the corner, swallowed by the city. I thought that was the end of it. Just another lost soul vanishing into the night. Then I heard the sound. Engines, deep, expensive ones, rumbling through the rain like thunder. 2 black cars glided into the parking lot, sleek and spotless despite the storm. The kind of cars you only saw in movies or nightmares. Men stepped out, tall and silent, wearing dark suits that didn't belong anywhere near a diner. Their eyes scanned the area with precision that made my pulse stutter. And then, from the second car, he appeared. A man in a tailored coat, the rain refusing to touch him as if even nature knew better. He walked like he owned the ground beneath his feet, his presence heavy and deliberate, every step commanding the air to move around him. His face was sharp, carved from control and quiet fury, and when his gaze flicked toward the diner, I felt it like a physical touch. Cold, assessing, dangerous. Carl was still standing by the counter when the door swung open again, the bell giving a pitiful ring as the stranger stepped inside, trailed by the scent of rain and power. "Sorry, sir, we're closed," Carl stammered, already nervous. The man didn't stop. His voice was smooth, but it carried an edge that could cut glass. "No, you're not." Carl blinked. "Look, if you're here for—" He never finished. The man's gaze shifted, hard and deliberate, until it landed on me through the glass. My heart stuttered. I could feel the weight of that look. Heavy, unrelenting, as if he already knew everything about me. He turned back to Carl. "You fired her?" Carl hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, she gave away food to some vagrant. Broke policy." The man's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room dropped. His voice came out quiet, deadly precise. "That girl you just fired," he said, each word deliberate and slow. "That's my sister." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the rain seemed to stop listening to itself. Carl's face drained of color. I didn't—" The man cut him off with a look, and then his eyes returned to me, locking me in place. I didn't breathe, didn't blink. The storm raged on around us, but I was frozen, caught in something I didn't understand. And in that single, impossible moment, as lightning split the sky and his gaze pinned me like a secret unspoken, I realized 2 things at once. He was lying, and whatever game he had just pulled me into, it was one I might never escape from alive. The silence that followed his words felt like the kind that hangs after a gunshot. Heavy, irreversible, and too sharp to breathe through. Carl stood frozen behind the counter, his jaw slack and his eyes darting between the stranger in the suit and me, as if waiting for someone to say it was a mistake, a cruel joke, anything that would let him crawl out from under the weight of that moment. But no one said anything. Not him. Not me. Not the man who had just called me his sister. My mouth opened, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to say I didn't know him, to deny whatever strange lie he'd just dropped into the world, but something in the way he looked at me stopped me cold. His gaze wasn't pleading. It was commanding, as if he were daring me to contradict him, as if my silence was the only thing keeping the floor from collapsing beneath us. Carl finally stammered something about a misunderstanding, about how he didn't mean to offend the boss's family, and the words made my stomach twist. the boss's family. There was a weight to that phrase. Something dark and old and whispered in alleys. Something people in this city only used when they talked about the kind of men who could make you disappear just by deciding you'd inconvenience them. I felt his hand brush against my arm then, light but steady, guiding me gently away from the door, and the contact sent a shock through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "Come on," he said quietly, his voice a low command that carried through the rain. "You're leaving with me." I should have refused. I should have demanded answers, screamed that he was insane, that I didn't know who he was or why he'd lied. But the truth was, I was numb. I followed him because standing still felt more dangerous than moving, because his voice carried the kind of certainty I hadn't heard in anyone for years. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist, though the sky still hung heavy and low, as if watching. One of the suited men opened the back door of a black car, and before I could think, he was ushering me inside. The leather was warm. The air smelled faintly of cologne and gun oil, and for a moment I just sat there, dripping water onto the seat, trying to remember how to breathe. The man, my supposed brother, slid in beside me. The door shut, and the driver pulled away without a word. The silence inside the car was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to break it. I turned to him finally, studying his profile. Strong, sharp, every line deliberate. There was something about him that demanded attention without asking for it. Something dangerous but strangely magnetic. "Who are you?" I asked, the question small but sharp, cutting through the hum of the engine. He didn't look at me right away. His eyes stayed on the window, watching the rain-smeared city pass by like it belonged to him. "Dante Moretti," he said finally. The name hit like a spark in a dry room. Everyone in Chicago knew that name. The Moretti family wasn't just powerful. They were a legend built on fear, a dynasty carved from blood and loyalty and silence. My pulse stuttered. "You're lying," I whispered. "I'm not your sister." That made him look at me then, really look, and there was something dangerous in the curve of his mouth, something almost like amusement but darker. "I know," he said simply, but he didn't. Why would you?" My voice broke and I hated the way it sounded, small and uncertain. "Why say that?" "Because it was the fastest way to stop him from humiliating you further," he said, leaning back, his tone infuriatingly calm. "And because in my world, when I call someone family, people don't touch them again." I wanted to be angry, but his words hit a nerve I didn't know was still raw. For a moment, I imagined what it might feel like to belong to someone who could protect me just by speaking. I shoved that thought away as quickly as it came. "You could have just told him to stop," I said, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. His eyes softened slightly, just enough to make me uneasy. "It wouldn't have worked. People like him don't listen unless they're afraid." I didn't know what to say to that. So I stayed quiet, staring out the window as the city blurred by in streaks of red and gold. The car finally stopped outside a tall, dark building that didn't have a name or sign, just a single light above the entrance and two men standing guard like statues. When the door opened, Dante stepped out first and turned to me. "You're safe here," he said, offering a hand. I hesitated, staring at his gloved fingers. "Safe from what?" "From the world," he said simply. And though the words should have sounded ridiculous, the way he said them made something deep inside me believe him. I took his hand. Inside, the building was all shadow and opulence. Marble floors, low light, the faint sound of jazz drifting from somewhere unseen. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a secret dressed up as luxury. Men nodded respectfully as Dante passed, their gazes flicking to me with curiosity and confusion. He led me through a long corridor into an office that looked like it had been carved out of an old cathedral. Dark wood, shelves full of leather-bound books, a decanter of amber liquid catching the dim light. He motioned for me to sit. "Let's be honest," I said, folding my arms tightly. "You don't bring strangers into your car or your whatever this place is. So what do you really want from me?" For the first time, his expression shifted, and something like approval flickered there. Faint but real. "You fed one of my men tonight," he said. "The one you thought was homeless." My blood ran cold. "That man was one of yours?" He nodded once. "He was testing the staff. I wanted to see if there was anyone decent left in that place." I blinked. "You... what?" "He was loyal to me. You were kind to him, that matters." I stared at him, trying to make sense of it. "So you... what? Reward kindness by scaring people half to death? You had me fired." "I didn't have you fired," he said smoothly. "He did. I simply decided to make use of his mistake." I laughed then, the sound brittle and humorless. "You call this use?" He leaned forward slightly, his gaze holding mine with unnerving steadiness. "You're smart, Isabella. You don't flinch when most people would. You showed compassion when everyone else turned away. In my world, that's a rare thing." "In your world," I said slowly, "people die for being too kind." He smiled then, and it wasn't reassuring. It was devastating. "Exactly." The weight of those words settled on my chest like a warning. I wanted to walk out, to slam the door and forget his face, but there was something about him, something dangerous and magnetic, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't been in years. "I don't owe you anything," I said, but my voice trembled. "No," he agreed softly, "but I owe you, and I always pay my debts." There was a pause then, long enough for the air to change between us, to become thick with something unspoken. Fear, curiosity, maybe even attraction, though I hated myself for feeling it. His eyes lingered on me a second too long before he turned toward the window. "Stay here tonight," he said, his voice quieter now. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." "What does that mean?" I demanded, standing, my pulse racing. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, and for the first time his mask slipped just enough for me to glimpse something beneath it. Something haunted, fragile, human. "It means," he said finally, "that whether you realize it or not, you just stepped into my world, and there's no going back." The words hit me like a prophecy, cold and final. And as the door clicked shut behind him, I had the sickening feeling that he was right. That my life, as I'd known it, had ended the moment he called me his sister. The morning after I woke in a world that didn't belong to me. The kind of world where silence cost more than gold and everything, from the walls to the air, smelled faintly of power. Like danger had a scent you couldn't ever wash off once it touched you. I hadn't meant to fall asleep in that unfamiliar bed. Hadn't meant to stay at all. But exhaustion had dragged me under. And when I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the view from the tall window. A skyline blurred by fog, the sun cutting weakly through the mist as if the city itself didn't dare shine too brightly over the Moretti Empire. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. The sheets were soft, the room elegant but restrained, like everything in Dante's world. Controlled, deliberate, nothing left to chance. Then the memory hit me, sharp as a blade's edge. The diner, the lie, the black car, the man with eyes that looked like sin dressed in restraint. I sat up, heart hammering, scanning the room for something familiar, something real. But all I found was a tray on the nightstand. Coffee, toast, and a folded note written in slanted handwriting that seemed too elegant for someone capable of such quiet menace. "Meet me downstairs. Don't leave without breakfast. No signature." He didn't need one. I sipped the coffee. more out of habit than hunger, and caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair was a mess, eyes puffy, the faint bruise of sleeplessness darkening beneath them. Yet there was something else there, too. Something sharp, alert, alive. It scared me a little. When I stepped out into the hallway, the house was awake but hushed. The people who worked for him moved like ghosts, efficient, invisible, avoiding eye contact as if looking too long might be dangerous. The air itself felt expensive. Every piece of furniture looked heavy with history, the kind that wasn't written down anywhere. I found Dante in what looked like a private dining room, morning light spilling through tall windows, gleaming off the dark wood of the table where he sat reading the paper like some timeless king in exile. He didn't look up right away, and for a moment I just stood there, studying the man who had turned my life upside down in less than 12 hours. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, exposing forearms marked with faint scars, and even in that quiet morning light, he radiated something raw and electric, something that drew your eyes whether you wanted it to or not. "You slept," he said finally, setting the paper aside, not a question but a statement, as though he already knew every detail of my night. I hesitated. For a while, I didn't plan to stay. He looked at me then, a faint smile ghosting across his lips, not warm but not cruel either. "People rarely plan to stay with me, they just do." The way he said it made my pulse jump. "I'm not one of your people, Dante." "No," he said softly. "You're not. But you're under my protection now, which makes you something else entirely." I didn't know whether to feel grateful or trapped. The words "under my protection" sounded like a promise and a sentence all at once. And what does that mean exactly? Am I your guest, your employee, your hostage? He stood then, moving toward me with that quiet, predatory grace that made space rearrange itself around him. "You're alive because of me," he said, stopping close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath. "That makes you mine to look after." The possessiveness in his tone sent a shiver up my spine. "I don't need looking after." He studied me, eyes dark and unreadable, then exhaled through his nose in something like amusement. "You'd be surprised how many people think that, right before the world proves them wrong." I wanted to push back, to tell him that I'd been surviving long before he decided to insert himself into my life. But before I could, a woman entered the room. A blonde in her 40s with the elegance of someone born into quiet wealth. She placed a file on the table and nodded at Dante before slipping out again without a word. He flipped it open, scanned the contents, and then looked back at me. "You're good with people," he said. "Fast learner, hard worker, the kind of person who notices details. That's rare." I frowned. "You've been digging into me." "Of course." His tone was matter-of-fact, as if there were no universe in which he wouldn't. "I don't bring strangers into my home blind. You've had a rough few years. You're loyal. And you don't scare easily. Those are assets I can use." "Use?" I repeated, my throat tightening. "What? You want me to scrub floors or take orders from your men?" A flicker of a smile crossed his lips, dangerous and amused. "You're not exactly maid material, Isabella. I have a private club downtown, the kind of place where discretion is the currency. You'll work there for now. Waitress, observe, listen, nothing more. It'll give you a chance to see how things work in my world." I laughed bitterly. "You think I want to be part of your world?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Wanting doesn't matter. You're already in it." Something in me broke then, a tremor of fear or defiance, I wasn't sure which. "You can't just decide that for me." "I already have," he said quietly. And I realized then that this man didn't ask permission. He made decisions, and the universe rearranged itself to fit them. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was a living thing, pulsing in the air, thick and dangerous. Then finally, he stepped back and gestured toward the door. "Luca will drive you. He'll explain the rules. You'll report to me directly at the end of each shift." "And if I refuse?" He paused, hand resting on the back of his chair. "Then I'll assume you don't value your safety, or your mother's." The words hit me like ice water. "What did you just say?" "I told you," he said calmly. "I do my homework. I know about her. Her condition, the unpaid bills, the hospital threatening to cut treatment. I can make all that go away, or not." I hated him in that moment. Hated the calmness, the manipulation, the way he looked at me like I was already caught in a web I hadn't even seen being spun. But beneath the hatred, something darker stirred. Curiosity, fascination, the dangerous pull of a man who could ruin you and make you crave it. So I did what survivors do. I nodded. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Luca, his driver, took me to the club. A sleek, private place hidden behind tinted glass and velvet ropes, where laughter and music disguised the quiet dealings of power. The staff eyed me with polite suspicion. I learned the rhythm of the place quickly. The coded language, the silent glances, the way money moved like a whisper from one hand to another. By midnight, I understood what Dante meant about discretion being currency. Everyone smiled, but no one trusted. Every secret had a price. When I returned to the mansion, Dante was waiting in his office, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking out over the city like a man surveying his kingdom. I stood at the door, exhaustion clinging to me. But he turned as soon as I entered, his gaze sweeping over me slowly, measuring, calculating, as though trying to decide what I'd become by the end of the night. "Well?" he asked, voice low. "It's a beautiful prison," I said softly. For the first time he smiled, not his usual razor-edged smirk, but something smaller, sadder, something that almost looked human. "Then make yourself comfortable," he said. "You'll be staying a while." He raised his glass slightly, a silent toast to my surrender, and I realized with a sinking certainty that the moment I stepped into his world, I had stopped being free. And the worst part was some dark, hidden part of me wasn't sure I wanted to be. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost unnatural, like a song I didn't remember learning but somehow knew by heart. Each note played in the shadow of someone else's design. The club, the mansion, the careful choreography of silence and obedience, they all began to blur together until I wasn't sure where the lie ended and the truth began, only that both had Dante Moretti's name written across them like a curse I couldn't escape. Every night I dressed in black silk and soft heels that pinched my feet, smiling for men who spoke in half-sentences and eyes that said more than their words ever could. I learned how to move without being seen, how to hear without appearing to listen, how to measure the air when Dante entered a room, because everything, conversation, laughter, even time itself, shifted around him. He didn't need to speak loudly. His silence did the talking. His presence filled the spaces people didn't know they were leaving open. And yet, beneath all that control, I began to sense something else in him. Something restless, like a wound that never quite healed. He would sometimes watch me when he thought I wasn't looking. Not with desire exactly, but with a kind of wary curiosity, as though he was trying to understand something about me that even I didn't know yet. It was one of those late nights when it happened. I had returned to the mansion after closing the club, exhausted, heels in my hand, ready to collapse into bed. The corridors were dim, the house half asleep, and as I passed his office, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Normally, I would have kept walking, but the faint sound of music stopped me. A soft piano melody drifting through the crack, tender and raw in a way that didn't belong in a house like this. I pushed the door open just enough to see him sitting at the desk, the light from a single lamp spilling over his face. In his hand, he held a small object, a silver necklace glinting faintly in the light. It wasn't the kind of jewelry men wore. It was delicate, feminine, with a tiny charm shaped like an angel's wing. His thumb brushed over it slowly, again and again, like a man touching a ghost. "Who is she?" I asked, before I could stop myself. He didn't startle, didn't turn immediately, just said, very softly, "You shouldn't be here." I hesitated. I couldn't sleep. He finally looked up, his eyes shadowed, darker than I'd ever seen them. "That doesn't mean you get to wander into my private space." I wasn't wandering, I heard music. "Curiosity," he said, standing, "is a dangerous habit." "I'm full of dangerous habits," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But my gaze had already shifted back to the necklace. "Who does it belong to?" He stared at it for a long time before answering. "Someone who's gone." There was something in his tone that made me lower my voice. "Your sister?" The air between us changed instantly, sharp and cold, as if the room itself had taken a breath. He didn't answer, but the flicker in his eyes was enough. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't be," he said, setting the necklace down with a deliberate motion, like he was putting away a weapon. "It doesn't change anything." I wanted to ask more, to know who she was, how she'd died, why the loss of her still clung to him like a shadow. But I saw the way his jaw tightened, and I knew I'd stepped too close to a line he wasn't ready to let me cross. He moved past me toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "Go to bed, Isabella, and don't touch what isn't yours." The words should have stung, but instead they burned with something else. Something I couldn't name yet. Something tangled between defiance and the ache of wanting to understand him. After he left, I stood there for a long time, staring at that necklace glinting on the desk like a piece of frozen moonlight. I should have walked away. I should have listened. But something about it called to me, the same way danger does when it whispers instead of shouts. I reached out and touched it. The metal was cold against my skin, but beneath that coldness was a faint warmth, like it had been held too long, too often, by someone who couldn't let it go. The charm was engraved with a single word, so small I had to tilt it toward the light to read it. Lucia. The name hit like a whisper through a locked door. That night, I dreamed of a girl standing in the rain, her hair dark, her laughter carried away by wind. And when I woke, my heart was pounding with the certainty that I'd heard that name before, long before Dante ever entered my life. The next morning, I found myself in the library, tracing the carved edge of a shelf, when something caught my eye. A book slightly out of place, a folded piece of paper wedged behind it. I pulled it free, curiosity dragging me forward even as my better judgment screamed at me to stop. The paper was old, the ink smudged, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Dante's. There were only a few lines. "Forgive me, Lucia. I couldn't protect you, but I'll make them pay." My hands shook as I folded it back. The words carried a weight that pressed against my ribs like a bruise. Whoever Lucia had been, she wasn't just a sister. She was a ghost that haunted every inch of his world, and now, somehow, I'd stepped into her shadow. That night at the club, Dante arrived late. He didn't usually come in person. His presence disrupted everything. But when he did, the air changed. Conversations died. Men straightened their ties, and even the music seemed to shift to match his mood. He was dressed in black, his expression unreadable, but when his gaze found me across the room, something in it flickered. Recognition, warning, maybe both. He approached slowly, cutting through the crowd like the eye of a storm. "You've been in my office," he said, his voice low enough that no one else could hear. I froze. Don't lie to me. My throat went dry. I didn't mean to snoop, He leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. When I tell you not to touch something, you obey. Do you understand? His tone was dangerous, but underneath it, I heard something else. Fear. Not for me, but for what my curiosity might unravel. I'm not your enemy, Dante, I said quietly. But if you keep treating me like a trespasser, I will become one. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, impossibly, he smiled. A small, cold thing that didn't reach his eyes. You remind me of her, he said softly. Lucia, I whispered before I could stop myself. His hand closed around my wrist, not hard, but enough to make my breath catch. Don't say her name. The space between us pulsed, electric and fragile, and I knew in that instant that whatever he was running from had teeth. He released me, his expression unreadable again. Go home, he said, turning away. Now. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to breathe air that wasn't filled with his voice. But instead I stood there, my pulse still racing, and realized something terrifying. Whatever secret bound Dante to that lost girl named Lucia, it was starting to bind me too. And somewhere deep down, beneath the fear and confusion and anger, a darker thought coiled inside me like a whisper. Maybe that was exactly what he wanted. There are moments when time stops, not in the soft, cinematic way people like to imagine, but in that raw, animal sense of stillness that comes right before something breaks. That night began like any other. Laughter layered over tension. The clink of glasses masking the whispers of danger that moved through the club like smoke through cracks. I'd gotten used to that feeling. The quiet edge that lingered under every conversation. The way men with expensive watches and colder hearts looked at one another like predators sharing a cage. I'd even gotten used to Dante's absence. The way his name alone was enough to make the walls hold their breath. But when he did appear, unannounced and late, the whole atmosphere shifted. Subtle yet immediate. Like a storm had rolled in without warning. His presence didn't just command attention, it demanded submission. People's spines straightened, voices dropped, even the band missed a beat. And me, God help me, I felt it in my pulse, that involuntary tightening, that awareness that his gravity pulled everything, even the parts of me that wished it didn't. He was speaking to Luca near the back corridor when I saw the first flicker of movement, just a flash. The glint of something metallic reflected in the mirrored wall. My mind didn't register it at first, not until the air tore open with the sharp, echoing sound of gunfire. Everything exploded at once, screams, shattering glass, the acrid scent of gunpowder cutting through perfume and alcohol. People dove for cover, tables overturned, and before I could think, someone grabbed my arm and shoved me behind the bar. Stay down. It was Luca, his voice like gravel and authority, but I couldn't see Dante. My heart pounded, a drumbeat of panic, the world narrowing into flashes of motion and sound. Another gunshot, then another. Dante! The word tore out of me before I could stop it. The chaos seemed endless, but then, through the smoke and confusion, I saw him, calm in the middle of madness, his movements fluid and terrifyingly precise. He wasn't hiding, he was hunting. Every shot he fired was deliberate, controlled, efficient. There was no hesitation, no wasted motion. This was the man the city whispered about in fear, the man whose name made grown men fold. When it was finally over, the silence that followed felt even louder. The bodies of the attackers were scattered across the floor. The music long stopped, and the room smelled like blood and bourbon and smoke. I was still crouched behind the bar when he found me, his shirt torn, a streak of red along his jaw that I prayed wasn't his own. He crouched down, eyes scanning me quickly for injuries, and for a second, The world shrank to that single moment, the look of raw concern breaking through his usual composure. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice lower, rougher than I'd ever heard it. I shook my head, too stunned to speak. He exhaled, a slow, trembling breath, then reached out and brushed his fingers along my cheek, almost absently, as if to convince himself I was real. "You shouldn't have been here tonight." "I work here," I whispered. "Not anymore," he said quietly, and before I could argue, he stood and turned to Luca. "Get her out of here, now." The car ride back to the mansion felt endless. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The city lights smeared past the window in streaks of color that looked more like fire than neon. Luca didn't speak, and neither did I. When we arrived, Dante wasn't far behind. He came in moments later, his expression colder than the rain dripping from his hair. "Who were they?" I asked as soon as he entered. He ignored the question. "You disobeyed me." I blinked, stunned. "I didn't. How could I?" "I told you to listen to Luca, to keep your head down. You screamed my name in a room full of enemies." "I thought you were dead." The words tore out of me before I could stop them, raw and furious and terrified all at once. That made him pause. For the first time, he looked uncertain, as if the idea that someone might care whether he lived or died was something foreign to him. "Don't ever do that again," he said softly. But there was something different in his tone now. Not command, but something closer to desperation. I took a step toward him. "Then stop making me afraid for you." His eyes met mine, and for a long, breathless moment, neither of us moved. The air between us was charged, too heavy to bear. He was close enough that I could smell the smoke clinging to him, the faint trace of whiskey and rain. His hand lifted, hesitated, then finally found my jaw, his thumb brushing the corner of my mouth in a gesture that felt both tender and forbidden. "You have no idea what you're asking," he murmured. "Then explain it to me," I said, the words trembling. "Tell me who those men were. Tell me why I keep seeing fear in everyone's eyes when they look at you." He exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering. "Because I've earned that fear. Because it keeps people alive." "And me?" "You're the exception," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. There was a terrible beauty in the way he said it, as if being the exception in his world was a blessing and a death sentence at once. Later that night, after he'd ordered extra guards around the mansion and sent half his men out to hunt whoever had dared attack him, I found him alone in the study. He was standing by the window, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, the city lights painting his profile in gold and shadow. "Was it them?" I asked softly. He didn't turn. "Who?" "The ones who killed Lucia." His hand tightened around the glass until I thought it might shatter. "You shouldn't know that name," he said without looking at me. "Then stop leaving ghosts lying around for me to trip over." Finally he turned. His eyes burned with something fierce and unguarded. "Lucia was innocent," he said, each word dragged from somewhere deep. "She trusted the wrong people. I didn't protect her. I won't make that mistake again." "You can't protect everyone," I said. "You can't protect me from everything." "You're right," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "But I can make sure no one touches what's mine." My breath caught at the way he said it. Possessive, dangerous, yet full of something that felt almost like pain. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him that I wasn't his, that nothing about this was normal or safe. But instead, when he reached for me, I didn't stop him. His lips found mine, slow and consuming. The kiss a collision of fury and surrender, like two people standing at the edge of a cliff and stepping forward anyway. I tasted blood, salt, and something that felt like truth. The kind that hurts when you finally let it out. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. his breath uneven. "You should have never met me," he whispered. "I ruin everything I touch." And for one dizzy, heartbreaking moment, I believed him. But some quiet, reckless part of me didn't care. Because ruin, when it came from him, felt like salvation wearing a darker face. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the room Dante had given me, feeling the ghost of his touch still burning against my lips like an unhealed wound. Everything about him lingered. The scent of smoke and leather, the heat of his body, the weight of his words. "You should have never met me." I told myself it was just a moment, a lapse born of chaos and adrenaline. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It had been building for weeks, in every glance, every argument that ended too close, in the tension that felt less like danger and more like gravity. And yet, in the pale light of morning, all that heat cooled into something else. Doubt. Thick and relentless, whispering that maybe what I felt wasn't real, that maybe I was just another piece in the elaborate game he played with the world. When I walked downstairs, the mansion was already alive with movement. Men in dark suits speaking in low tones, phones ringing, footsteps echoing like distant thunder. The aftermath of the attack had turned Dante's empire into a hornet's nest. Orders were being given, alliances questioned, enemies hunted. But Dante himself was nowhere to be seen. Luca intercepted me in the hallway, his expression tense. "You should stay in your room today." "Why?" "Because the less you hear, the safer you are." I crossed my arms. "That's not an answer." He sighed, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "There are things happening you don't want to know about, Isabella. Trust me on that." "I stopped trusting people who tell me what's good for me," I said, brushing past him before he could stop me. The truth was, I couldn't stay still. My thoughts were too loud, my heart too restless. I needed to see him, to hear something that would make sense of the chaos he'd wrapped me in. But when I reached his office, the door was closed, and from inside came voices. One of them was Dante's, low and steady, the tone he used when he was negotiating, when every word was a weapon carefully sharpened before being spoken. The other voice, I recognized it after a moment. Marco, one of his lieutenants. "You should have told her," Marco said. "She deserves to know what this is really about." "I told her enough," Dante replied. "The rest isn't her burden." There was a pause, then Marco's voice dropped. "She's not just some girl, Dante. You brought her in for a reason. Don't pretend otherwise." I leaned closer, heart hammering, barely daring to breathe. "I brought her in because it was safer," Dante said, his tone colder now. "They were watching her. They would have used her if I didn't claim her first." "Claim her?" Marco repeated, with something like disbelief. "And what happens when she finds out that the stranger she fed that night wasn't some random man, but a test you designed to bait her? You think she'll forgive that?" My stomach dropped. The world tilted. There was a long silence before Dante spoke again. Quieter this time, almost regretful. "She'll hate me, but she'll be alive." I didn't wait to hear more. My body moved before my mind could catch up, pushing me away from the door, down the hall, through the marble corridor that suddenly felt colder than ice. My breath came fast, uneven, like my lungs couldn't decide whether to breathe or break. It had all been a lie. Every moment, every word. The man in the diner hadn't been a stranger at all. He'd been part of Dante's game, a test, a setup to see if I'd show kindness. And I had. I'd fallen right into his web, not realizing the spider was already waiting with open arms and patient hunger. I didn't even know where I was going, until I found myself outside, in the garden behind the mansion. The morning air was sharp and damp, the ground slick from the night's rain. I sat down on the edge of the stone fountain, clutching my coat around me, trying to hold myself together. How could he do this? How could someone so careful, so composed, look at me like I mattered and still lie so completely? I didn't hear him until he was standing behind me. You shouldn't be out here, he said quietly. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Then maybe stop sending your men to spy on me. His expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered, just slightly. You heard. I heard everything, I said, my voice trembling with rage I could barely contain. You used me. You manipulated me from the start. That night at the diner, you staged it. He took a step toward me, but I raised a hand, stopping him. Don't come any closer. It wasn't what you think. No? I laughed, a sound sharp enough to hurt. Because it sounded a lot like you needed someone to test your loyalty trap, and I was just stupid enough to play along. His jaw tightened. It was to protect you. From what? From the truth? From the people who would have found you, he said, his voice cracking with something dangerously close to frustration. You think I enjoy this? You think I wanted you caught in this world? I stared at him, searching his face for any sign of remorse. You don't get to make that decision for me, Dante. You don't get to lie and call it protection. He moved then, faster than I expected, his hands gripping my shoulders, his eyes burning into mine. If I told you everything, you'd run, and if you ran, they'd find you, and if they found you, you'd die. That's not something I was willing to risk. The anger in me faltered, replaced by something heavier, more fragile. Then what am I to you? A pawn? A debt? A ghost you're trying to save because you couldn't save your sister? He flinched, just barely, but I saw it. Don't, he said quietly. Don't use her against me. Then stop making me feel like her shadow, I whispered. He let go of me then, stepping back, his mask falling into place again. You should leave, he said after a long moment. You'll be safer away from me. Safe, I repeated bitterly. Is that what this is supposed to be? Because it feels like a cage. He turned away. You'll thank me one day. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to make him feel the chaos he'd created inside me. Instead, I walked past him, through the gate, down the long gravel path until the mansion disappeared behind me. By the time I reached the main road, the sky had darkened again, heavy with another storm. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even have money. I just knew I needed to be far from him. From the lies, from the way his eyes made me forget how to think. I found a motel on the edge of the city, paid in cash, and locked myself in a room that smelled like dust and regret. The silence felt merciless, the kind that makes you realize just how alone you really are. But peace didn't last long. When I woke the next morning, there was a folded envelope slipped under my door. No name, no note, just a single sheet of paper inside with one line written in neat, familiar handwriting. Your boss is dead. And underneath, taped to the corner of the page, was a photo. Carl, the man who'd fired me from the diner, lying lifeless on a dirty floor, a bullet hole clean through his chest. My hands trembled as I read it again and again, because written faintly in red ink along the bottom edge was something else. They know who you are, Isabella. When you're running from something you can't name, every sound becomes a threat, every silence an accomplice. The motel walls felt too thin, the shadows too deep, and the air too heavy with the scent of cheap cleaner and fear. I hadn't slept, not really. I kept thinking about that photograph, Carl's body, the bullet hole, the words scrawled across the bottom. They know who you are, Isabella. The words kept echoing through my head like a warning I didn't understand. Who were they? How could anyone possibly know who I was when I barely understood it myself? I had no secrets, no crimes, no ties to Dante's world, except him. And yet something in my gut told me that photo wasn't just a threat. It was a message. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind to leave the city altogether, I packed what little I had, shoved the envelope deep into my bag, and slipped out the back door. The streets were still half asleep, the morning fog curling low like smoke around the pavement. I walked fast, trying not to look over my shoulder, though every step felt like someone else's echo following just behind me. I made it as far as the bus station. I was standing in line for a ticket when I saw him. Tall, dark, impossible to mistake, standing by the entrance like a ghost that refused to stay buried. Dante. His coat was black, his expression unreadable, his presence so commanding that even the people around him seemed to unconsciously step aside, clearing a path without knowing why. My stomach clenched. I froze, torn between relief and fury. He walked toward me slowly, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. "You really thought you could disappear from me?" he asked, when he was close enough that I could smell the faint trace of rain and gunpowder clinging to him. "Don't you dare act like I belong to you," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You lied to me, Dante, about everything." His eyes softened, but only barely. "I lied to keep you breathing. You lied to control me." "That too," he admitted, without shame. "Because control is the only thing that keeps people alive in my world." I wanted to slap him, to scream, to do anything that would shatter that maddening calm of his. But before I could, I noticed the men behind him. 2 of them, both watching me. Their gazes sharp, assessing, not like bodyguards but like hunters. Dante followed my line of sight. "They're not mine," he said quietly. The words landed like a blade. And then almost instantly chaos erupted. A gunshot cracked the morning air, shattering the glass of the station doors. People screamed, ducking behind benches, running for exits. Dante grabbed me before I could react, pulling me down behind a concrete pillar as another shot tore through the space where I'd been standing. His hand pressed hard against my back, his body a shield between me and the bullets. "Don't move," he said, his voice a growl against my ear. "Who are they?" I gasped. "People who want me dead," he said. "And now that you've been seen with me again, they'll want you too." The sound of footsteps thundered closer, and Dante moved with terrifying precision, drawing his gun from beneath his coat. 2 shots, clean, exact, and then silence. My ears rang. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. He helped me up, his hands steady despite the chaos. "We have to go." I didn't argue. He led me out through a side exit into the rain, his arm around my waist as if I were something fragile he couldn't afford to lose. A car screeched to a stop beside us, Luca at the wheel, and within seconds we were speeding through the city, the streets blurring into gray streaks behind us. Only when we reached the outskirts did Dante finally speak again. "They know your name because of your father." The words hit me like a physical blow. "My father's dead." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Yes. And when he died, he left a trail. One that led back to me." I turned toward him, disbelief and fear twisting together in my chest. "What are you talking about?" "Your father worked for the Morettis years ago," he said quietly. "Not directly for me, I was still building my own side of the business back then, but for my father. He was an accountant, one of the few people we trusted with the numbers." "That's not possible," I whispered. "He worked in finance, but—" "Yes," Dante interrupted gently. "For shell companies tied to our holdings. He didn't know what they were at first, but when he did, it was too late. He found something, records, money, something he wasn't supposed to see, and he took it, disappeared with it." I stared at him, my breath catching. "You're saying my father stole from the Mafia?" "I'm saying he stole from my family," Dante said, his tone heavy, measured. "And people don't forget debts like that. Not even after decades, not even after death." My mind reeled. "So this is what this was all along? You brought me in to settle some ancient score?" "No," he said, his voice sharp now. I brought you in because when word got out who you were, others wanted to use you against me. The night at the diner wasn't random, Isabella. That man was supposed to watch you, not test you, but someone else got to him first. Someone from the Rossi family. I felt cold all over. You're saying they killed Carl to get to me? They killed him because they thought you were mine, he said, his gaze locking with mine. And they wanted to send a message. Something in his expression shifted then. Something raw and dangerous. That's why you can't run. That's why I can't let you go. They'll keep coming until one of us is dead, and I won't let that be you. I turned toward the window, watching the rain blur against the glass, trying to process the impossible truth unraveling inside me. You could have told me, I whispered. You could have trusted me. His voice softened. Trust is a luxury I lost a long time ago. The car slowed as we reached the gates of the mansion. Guards stood waiting, their faces tense, their eyes scanning the tree line as the gates closed behind us. Inside, the air felt thick with tension. Dante stopped me in the foyer, his hands still at my arms, his eyes searching mine. I need you to understand something, he said, his tone low, deliberate. This isn't about loyalty anymore. It's survival. You stay here under my protection, and I'll keep you safe. You leave, and I won't be able to promise anything. I should have said no. I should have walked away, even if it meant running forever. But something in the way he said it, the unspoken fear beneath the steel, rooted me to the ground. You keep saying you'll protect me, I said softly. But what happens when it's you I need protecting from? For a heartbeat, his face broke. Just a flicker. But it was there. A glimpse of the man beneath the armor. Then God help us both, he murmured, before turning away, leaving me standing in the echo of his words. That night, lying awake in that too large bed, I finally understood what it meant to be bound to someone not by choice but by consequence. Because some ties aren't chains you can break. They're shadows that move when you move, breathe when you breathe, and whisper your name in the dark when you wish they wouldn't. And I had the sinking feeling that no matter what happened next, I would never again be able to tell where Dante ended and I began. It started with silence, the kind that isn't empty but loaded, like a gun waiting to go off. For days after Dante brought me back, the house existed in a tense, breathless quiet, each room thick with the kind of calm that comes before something terrible. His men moved like shadows through the hallways, whispering into radios, checking locks twice, scanning the perimeter. I could feel it in the air, the weight of something inevitable pressing down on all of us. Dante hadn't said much since that night in the car. He spent hours locked away in his office, buried in phone calls and documents, emerging only to give brief, clipped orders. When I did see him, he looked different, harder somehow, colder around the edges, as though the part of him that still resembled a man was slowly being replaced by the legend people whispered about. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I hated him for what he'd done, for how he'd lied, for how he'd made me a part of his bloody empire. But the truth was far less clean, because hate is still a kind of tether, and mine held strong. It was nearly midnight when I heard it. A sound so soft at first I thought I'd imagined it. The faint crackle of static, followed by a sharp pop, then the unmistakable scent of smoke drifting down the hallway. I was halfway to my door when the explosion hit. The world shattered. The force threw me against the wall, knocking the breath from my lungs. The lights flickered and died, plunging the mansion into chaos. Flames leapt to life somewhere downstairs, and through the rising haze of smoke and panic, I could hear shouts. Gunfire, glass breaking, the thunder of boots. "Dante!" I screamed, stumbling to my feet. The corridor filled with the acrid sting of burning wood. I ran toward the sound of fighting, my heartbeat matching the rapid gunfire echoing through the halls. Men were shouting orders, and I saw the flash of muzzle fire at the far end of the corridor. shadows colliding, falling, vanishing into smoke. A hand grabbed me from behind. I turned, ready to fight, but it was Luca. His face was smeared with soot, his expression wild. "You need to get out, now." "Where's Dante?" "He's in the East Wing. Go to the car." "I'm not leaving without him." He cursed under his breath, but before he could drag me away, another blast ripped through the ceiling. Debris rained down. The air filled with heat and dust, and the low groan of collapsing beams. I didn't think. I ran. I followed the fire, the trail of destruction that led straight toward the study. The door was half torn from its hinges, flames licking up the walls. And there he was. Dante, blood running down his arm, gun in hand, firing with deadly precision at the men forcing their way through the window. His movements were sharp and deliberate, but I could see it in his posture. He was weakening. "Dante!" His head whipped toward me, and in that instant of distraction another shot rang out. He staggered. Time fractured. I ran to him, catching him as he fell to one knee, his hand clutching his side where blood bloomed dark and fast. His skin was hot beneath my hands, slick with sweat and blood, his breath coming ragged. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, forcing the words through clenched teeth. "You shouldn't be bleeding," I snapped, pressing my hands over the wound. "God, Dante!" He grabbed my wrist, his grip still strong despite the pain. "Listen to me. You have to leave. They're here for me." "Then let them take me too," I said, voice trembling. "I'm not leaving you again." Something broke in his expression then. A crack through the armor, raw and unguarded. He reached up, his fingers brushing the side of my face, leaving a streak of blood on my cheek. "You're impossible," he whispered, half a laugh, half a curse. "I told myself to keep you out of this, to stay away, but I—" "Don't," I said, shaking my head. "Don't say something you can't take back." He smiled faintly, that same small, haunted smile I'd seen once before in the dim light of his office. "You think I regret this?" "Dante—" "I don't," he said, voice low, trembling now not from weakness but from something deeper. "You were the one thing I didn't see coming, the one person I didn't plan for, and somehow you became the only thing that still feels real." My heart twisted, torn between fury and heartbreak. "Why tell me now?" "Because there's a chance I won't get another," he said simply. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him he wasn't allowed to die just because fate had a cruel sense of timing. But the words got stuck in my throat when another explosion shook the walls. Flames burst through the window, scattering embers across the floor. Luca's voice echoed from down the hall. "We have to go." Dante tried to stand, but his legs gave out. I slipped an arm under his shoulders, hauling him up with everything I had. "You're not dying here, do you hear me? You don't get to leave me with all your damn secrets." He coughed, blood staining his lips, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. "You'd drag me through hell if you had to, wouldn't you?" "Yes," I whispered, "and I'd make the devil wait." We moved through the smoke, stumbling, coughing, the heat searing our skin. Luca appeared through the haze, grabbing Dante's other side, half carrying him toward the door. Outside, the night was chaos. Cars ablaze, men shouting, bullets slicing through the darkness. I heard one of Dante's guards yelling orders, but all I could focus on was the way Dante's weight sagged heavier against me with every step. When we reached the car, I turned to him, tears cutting through the soot on my face. "Stay awake," I begged. "Please." He caught my wrist weakly, his thumb brushing the pulse there. "You don't know what you've done to me," he murmured. "You've made me want something I can't have." "Then take it," I said fiercely. "Take me. Take whatever it is you think you can't." His eyes closed, a faint smile curving his lips even as his strength faltered. "Careful, cara mia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "You say things like that, and I might just believe you." The ambulance sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, growing louder, and as Luca drove us away from the burning mansion, I looked back through the rear window and watched Dante's empire crumble, the flames devouring everything he'd built to protect the ghosts of his past. I should have felt free. I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt something far more dangerous. The realization that in saving him, I'd bound myself to him completely, body and soul. And even if the fire died, I knew it had already moved inside me, burning too deep to ever be put out again. The first thing I remembered was the smell of smoke, faint, lingering, as if it had followed me from the burning mansion, wrapping around me like the ghost of what we'd barely escaped. When I opened my eyes, the world swayed. My wrists were bound, my head pounding, and the dim light overhead flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to move when I didn't. For a moment, I thought I was still in Dante's house, that the fire had trapped me in some fever dream. But then I saw the concrete walls, the rust-stained floor, the single iron door bolted shut from the outside, and I knew I wasn't anywhere he could find me. I tried to steady my breathing, but panic clawed at the edges of it. The last thing I remembered clearly was Dante's blood on my hands, the sound of sirens, the heat of his body fading as he slipped in and out of consciousness beside me. I had begged him not to close his eyes, not to leave me, and he had promised, in that voice roughened by smoke and pain, that he'd find me no matter what. But he wasn't here. I was alone. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, until the air felt too heavy to swallow. Then the door opened with a long, slow groan. The man who stepped inside wasn't one of Dante's. His suit was expensive but carelessly worn, the kind of elegance that hides rot underneath. He had a scar cutting through his cheek and eyes that carried the kind of stillness that only comes from cruelty practiced and perfected. "Isabella Romano," he said, drawing out my name like a taste he was deciding whether he liked. "You've caused quite a lot of trouble." I didn't answer. My throat was dry, but even if it hadn't been, I wasn't sure what I could say that wouldn't cost me something. He smiled faintly, a thin, serpentine thing. "You know who I am, don't you?" I did. I'd heard his name whispered in Dante's house. Matteo Rossi, the man who'd spent years trying to take everything the Morettis had built. "You're his problem," I said quietly. His smile widened. "No, my dear. You're his problem. And now that makes you mine." He circled me slowly, his footsteps echoing. "Do you know how long I've waited to hurt Dante Moretti? To make him bleed the way he's made everyone else bleed? I've killed men, burned homes, torn families apart. But nothing has ever hurt him the way you do." He stopped behind me, his breath hot against my ear. "Do you want to know why?" I closed my eyes. "Because he loves me." The words escaped before I could stop them, a trembling truth I hadn't dared to name until that moment. Matteo laughed softly, the sound cruel and delighted. "Oh yes, he loves you, but not the way you think. You see, love in his world is always a substitute for something he lost." I turned my head, my pulse hammering. "What are you talking about?" He moved in front of me then, crouching so we were face to face. His eyes glittered in the half-light. "Lucia Moretti," he said, "the sister he swore to protect, the one he adored more than his own life. She died because of your father." I stared at him, confusion and disbelief crashing through me. "My father? No, he—" "Stole from them," Matteo interrupted, his tone almost tender now, like he was savoring the story. "Money, yes, but more than that. Information, names, locations. He sold them to my family for protection when the Morettis turned on him. And one of those names led us straight to Lucia." My stomach dropped, the air vanishing from my lungs. "You killed her." He tilted his head. "I ordered it. But I didn't pull the trigger. That was Dante's job." The world stopped moving. What? I whispered. Matteo's smile was patient, indulgent, the way a man looks at someone just before breaking them. She was taken, used, and when we were done, we sent her back to him, broken, humiliated, barely breathing. He begged her to live, but she couldn't bear it, and so she put his gun in her mouth and— "Stop," I said, my voice shaking, my whole body trembling. He leaned closer. "You remind him of her, Isabella. The same eyes, the same fire. When he looks at you, he sees the sister he couldn't save. When he touches you, he's trying to rewrite his own failure. That's what you are to him. His redemption story dressed in your skin." My vision blurred. I tried to twist away from him, but the ropes dug deeper into my wrists. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said, straightening. "Ask him if he ever gets to you before I decide to end this. Ask him why he keeps her necklace locked in a drawer he never opens. Ask him why he couldn't pull the trigger the day she begged him to finish what we started." He turned toward the door, pausing in the frame. "Don't worry," he said, almost kindly. "He's coming for you. He'll burn half the city down to do it. And when he does, I'll let him watch what it costs to love again." The door slammed shut behind him, and the silence that followed was absolute. I sat there shaking, the truth pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't bear. I wanted to hate Dante, to believe every word Matteo said, but my heart refused to listen. Because love, real, brutal love, doesn't care about logic or bloodlines or ghosts. It just hurts, and it keeps hurting, until there's nothing left to burn. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The line between them blurred. I thought about Dante, the way his voice sounded when he said my name, the way he looked at me as if I were something dangerous and sacred all at once. I thought about Lucia, about the necklace, about the letter I'd found in his study. "Forgive me, Lucia. I couldn't protect you." And suddenly I understood. He wasn't haunted by her death. He was imprisoned by it. Everything he'd done, every lie, every act of control, every attempt to keep me close while pushing me away, it had all been an echo of that loss. He wasn't trying to replace her. He was trying to forgive himself. And I knew then that if I ever saw him again, I would make him. Because love, even the kind born in darkness, demands truth. And the only way to free him, to free both of us, was to drag that truth out into the light, no matter how much it burned. So I waited, heart pounding, staring at the door, whispering his name into the dark. "Come for me, Dante." And somewhere, far away, as if the universe was listening, I thought I heard it. The distant echo of engines, the promise of fire rising again. I heard him before I saw him. The low rumble of engines rolling through the night. The metallic click of magazines loading. The brief, electric pause that comes when men on the edge of violence draw their last calm breath. I was still bound to the chair, wrists raw and bleeding. But something inside me stilled, because I knew that sound. It was the same rhythm my heart had learned since the first time I'd heard Dante Moretti speak. Slow, deliberate, fatal. The door burst open in a storm of gunfire and shouting, the air filling with smoke and fury. Men screamed, bullets ricocheted, walls shattered. For a heartbeat, I saw Matteo Rossi standing at the far end of the room, gun raised, smiling like the devil greeting an old friend. Then Dante was there, moving through the chaos like something carved from night itself. Bleeding, beautiful, unstoppable. He fired once, twice, the sound deafening, and Matteo staggered backward, surprise painted across his face before he crumpled to the floor. Silence followed, sharp and absolute. When it was over, he turned toward me. His face was streaked with soot and blood, his shirt torn, his breath coming hard, but his eyes, those impossible eyes, found me with the same terrifying certainty they always had, as though the whole world could burn and he'd still see only me through the flames. He crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside me, his hands trembling as he cut through the ropes. "You're safe now," he whispered, though his voice sounded like it had been dragged across gravel. I wanted to believe him, but safety was a word that no longer meant what it used to. I reached up, cupped his face in both hands, feeling the tremor under his skin. "He told me about Lucia," I said, and his whole body went still. For a long time he didn't answer. Then quietly, "Of course he did." "He said you blamed yourself," I went on, the words breaking even as I tried to hold them steady. "That everything you've done was because of her. That when you look at me—" I couldn't finish. He closed his eyes, exhaling as if the confession itself were a wound. "Lucia was light," he said finally. "Too good for this world, and I dragged her into mine. She asked me to let her go, and I couldn't, so she did it herself. There isn't a day I don't hear that gunshot." He opened his eyes again, meeting mine. "When I met you, I saw pieces of her. Not her face, not her voice, but the same heart, the same mercy I destroyed once. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was trying to forgive myself." I felt tears sting my eyes, hot and useless. "You can't keep living for the dead, Dante." "And yet," he murmured, "the dead never stop living in me." Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. The night smelled of blood and rain and gasoline. Luca's voice called from somewhere beyond the door. A signal, a warning, maybe both. But Dante didn't move. He just looked at me as though the whole collapsing world had narrowed to this single, fragile moment. "Do you hate me?" he asked, his voice raw. I shook my head slowly. "No. I hate that I can't." He let out a small, broken laugh. "You should run. You should leave this place, this city, this name. There's nothing left here but ghosts." "And you?" He hesitated. "I don't get to leave?" I leaned closer, pressing my forehead to his. "Then I'm staying." Something inside him gave way. Not with words, but in the way his hands slid into my hair, in the way his mouth found mine with a desperate tenderness that felt like surrender and confession woven together. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with all the things neither of us had been brave enough to say. Around us, the world smoldered. But for that breath of time, there was only the pulse of two broken hearts finding their rhythm again. When we finally pulled apart, he whispered, "There's no happy ending in this life, Isabella." "Then we'll steal one," I said. He smiled, not the cold, sharp curve of the Mafia king, but the quiet, human one I'd seen only once, back in that diner before everything began. Then he stood, helping me up, and together we stepped out into the night. The compound behind us was burning, a second dawn rising out of ruin. Luca's men were waiting with cars, engines idling, headlights cutting through the smoke. But before Dante could move, a single shot rang out from the darkness. He jerked, breath catching, blood blooming crimson across his side, the same place he'd been wounded before. I caught him as he fell, my hands already slick with his blood, my voice breaking. "No, no, stay with me." He smiled faintly, his hand lifting to brush a tear from my cheek. "Looks like I'm still bad at keeping promises." "Don't you dare," I whispered. His eyes held mine, soft and endless. "Listen to me, cara mia. You take the car. You go to the safe house in Naples. Luca knows where. You live. Do you hear me? You live." "Not without you." He shook his head weakly. "You already have everything I am." Then his hand slipped from mine. For a long moment the world went silent again, except for the rain hissing against the flames. I pressed my forehead to his chest, felt the last faint echo of his heartbeat, and something inside me shattered so completely it felt almost holy. When dawn came, the city was quiet. I left him there with the rising sun, wrapped in his coat, his sister's necklace clenched in my hand. I drove until the road disappeared into the sea, until the smoke of the night faded into mist. They say grief is a cage, but for me it became a map, one that led not back to him, but to the pieces of myself I'd lost in his shadow. Some nights, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I still hear his voice. Not a command this time, not a warning, but a promise whispered into the dark. I told you I'd find you. And I answer the way I always do, softly, into the quiet that loves him as much as I do. I'm still here,